Boom. Sorry, that was loud. That was obnoxious. I didn't mean to scare anyone. Did I scare you? Did I scare you? Oh, there's only one person. Good. Good, because that was scary. Why am I cropped still? Oh, I must have set it to crop me. There we go. Now I'm uncropped. How's everyone doing? How's our one viewer doing? I mean, people are probably confused because Carlos set up a live stream preview for tonight for our meeting with Ramiro, but that's all right. There's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. It might mean we have a few less viewers. And I don't know why we have to have a live preview up for 6 hours, but that's just Midwestern Marks being technologically inept. You know what I mean? Scary. What did I miss? What was I saying is scary? Oh, I don't know. I just shouted. I was like, wow. I set up these lights today. Not only do we have LED lights now, and not only can I light up my bookcase, but I can control them with the remote. Check it. Look at that. Now we got rainbow lights. Support LGBTQ. Now we got, we can do really any color we want. That's not true. Any color between red, green, and blue. And then I can make it, what can I make it do? I can make it flow. Make it flow. All right. Oh, it's flowing. Pulse. Flash. Jump. This one's my favorite. You go from color to color. I would keep it like this. I just feel like that'd be distracting. Versus red is, it's just like communism. Feel me? Sick stuff. Yeah, thank you, man. This is the power of communism, I guess. Someone says Z. We are going to talk about so-called Operation Z today. We're going to get into it real soon here because I am excited to talk about this David Pakman video because I love talking about YouTube social democrats who I used to watch and used to think were socialists or quote-unquote leftists, which what does that word even mean anymore? What does the word leftist mean? I think rad libs have taken all its meaning away, but and then if I got the energy, I want to explain, not explain totally, because I'm not an economist. I don't claim to be, but I have read Capital, the first volume at least a few times. Working on the second volume now. And studied bourgeois economics in college at that level. So I've just noticed a lot of the differences between Marxist economics versus like Western Austrian economics, or just the economics that's taught in like Western institutions and academies. And, the way that they're analyzing what the Fed just did with increasing benchmark interest rates, looking at that from a Marxist perspective versus a bourgeois perspective. And in order to get it from a Marxist perspective, we'll be looking at a video from Richard Wolff. So we'll probably do that today. I kind of want to do the video of Richard Wolff first. I have it planned out to do in reverse. I have it planned out to go over what CNN and Investopedia and all these mainstream sources say about the Fed adjusting the interest rates. But I kind of want to go over Richard Wolff's first. So we can get the Marxist idea first. But hey, from the UK, the left is... Hello, UK comrade. The left is obsessed with identity politics and it's alienating them from the working class. Yes, you just came right out and said it, huh? You're just like, I'm from the UK. Identity politics are a distraction from class struggle. I agree 99.9%. There are places where identity matters, like proletarian feminism points out the ways that women are discriminated against, and I guess in the workplace, and you would consider that an identity group. And police disproportionately target black and brown people. Again, you could call that an identity group. But then the main distinction is by class. The main way, I mean, police are far, 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 far more likely to shoot a poor person rather than a rich person. So, and obviously, same with women. Like, socialists aren't out here fighting for Oprah Winfrey. But we can still recognize, the unique struggles of those identities. But yes, the left is just absolutely obsessed with it. They think leftism means just talking about identity politics all the time. They call people right wingers who are anti-war, in favor of Medicare for all, in favor of working class struggle, and don't hold any bigoted positions. But I think we've talked about that a lot. Check out our videos about wokeism or anti-wokeism. So sorry, I got a little off track here. So we were talking about the Fed. Oh yeah, the first thing I wanted to address though is Iran, because I'm sure some people have seen what's going on in Iran, and I've researched Iran a little bit, but it definitely hasn't been like my area of focus. Right? I've said before about Iran, I support their sovereignty. The 1979, I believe, revolution, Islamic revolution, was opposed to the West and imperialism. So I recognize Iran as an anti-imperialist force in the world. They trade with Venezuela, they trade with China. But obviously I said they're an Islamic republic, not a socialist republic. And, we ultimately support socialist republics, and I support the revolutionaries, the communist forces in Iran. Struggling for that. However, I don't know what's going on right now. I've definitely heard like legitimate complaints coming out of Iran, complaints about their government. But I have not looked into it to even know what's really going on. And one thing I do know is that I've gotten a ton of comments on TikTok from anonymous accounts or accounts with no profile picture. Or a profile picture that's not their actual face. And it'll, they all give a very, very, very similar message. It says something along the lines of, will you be the voice of Iran? Can you be the voice of Iran right now? The people of Iran need you. And it's very similar to what I noticed in our TikTok comments during SOS Cuba, when Russia began their military operation in Ukraine. And we now know that the State Department was, using or carrying out influence campaigns using bots, using social media bots. So I'm sure, no matter what's going on in Iran, the U.S. is trying to take advantage of the situation to their own interest. And I'm sure they're using some kind of, influence campaign techniques. But I haven't said anything about the conflict, right? And there are people running around on TikTok. I've seen it, not a ton, but there are people telling others that I've already said this is, a U.S.-backed color revolution, and said there are no legitimate complaints in Iran. It's all just the U.S. And maybe it is, but I've never said that because I don't talk about stuff that I haven't researched. And that I'm not, I don't have a principled or researched opinion on, because I'm not afraid to say I don't know, right? I don't know enough to talk about it because I don't. But people are out here claiming that I was talking about it, that I was telling people that this is a color revolution or whatever, which, if it turns out to be that, then I'll say that, but I don't know right now. And I'm just so tired of the smears and the lies, for real. Like, it's so old at this point because these people don't have any real arguments, right? If you're a freaking imperialist and you get called out on your imperialism, there's no real arguments. It's just, you're a tanky, you're paid off by Putin, you support human rights abuses, you're a genocide denier. There's nothing except for sorry, I'm texting Carlos back about the new broadcast. or about our stream tonight with Ramiro. But these people make no real arguments because they have no real argument, right? They don't want to engage on the merits or on the substance. So it's just like lies and smears. And I'm just tired of it. But, I better get used to it because it comes with the territory and I ain't stopping with this whole socialist struggle thing. I'm going to need to get some water before the next segment. I'm dying. I'm dying of thirst. Hi, Eddie. Hi, Petamillo. Welcome, welcome. Eddie, what's your opinion on utopia? Like the idea of a utopia? I don't believe in utopias. I'm a scientific socialist. Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific is one of my favorite books where Engels argues that, utopia isn't possible and especially not overnight. And communism is impossible overnight. But if that's like a TV show or a movie or something, then I probably look pretty stupid right now because I don't know. I'm going to clip Eddie saying this is a color revolution with no context. Please upload it on TikTok and say like genocide denier Eddie Liger Smith says he doesn't know anything about the conflict in Iran and he has no evidence, but it's a US-backed color revolution. And then cut it up to sound like I'm saying that. I don't know that much about this conflict. I don't know, what's actually going on. But this is what's going on. And everyone will love it. Prax Ben will make a video within seconds. All the libertarians will be like, we knew it. We knew we'd get him eventually. Of course, USA is involved, but what portion of the credit goes to USA, I do not know. Right. Yeah, that's what I agree with you. I feel like regardless of what's going on, the US is going to try and use it. They use any kind of political or economic crisis to try and steer things, the way they want them to go. Even if it's not a color revolution, CIA can make it one, especially if Westerners outrage too much, especially if Westerners need to be careful. Exactly. Yeah, and they turn legitimate protests or legitimate uprisings into color revolutions or coups. Like Euromaidan in Ukraine, there were legitimate complaints of the capitalist corrupt Ukrainian government, but Ukraine had elected a president who didn't want to ban the Russian language, and who didn't want to start war with Russia and wage a civil war within their own country against the Donbass. So the U.S. kept pumping money into Euromaidan, keeping it going, keeping the protests going, literally having like musical artists and concerts to keep people out there in the streets protesting. And then, started funding the most extremist violent elements who were willing to escalate the protests into an actual violent coup. Elements like the Azov Battalion and Right Sector. And that's what happened. So they always prey on real stuff that's going on the ground. If there's a real crisis, a real political conflict going on, the U.S. jumps on it. Hi, Eddie. Hello. Welcome to the stream. Eddie, would you like to stream as a full-time thing? I don't know what you mean by that. Because I guess I do know what you mean by that. No. I mean, I like it being a part of the content we put out. I really like streaming. I like talking to you all and interacting. I like reacting to the videos. I like breaking down theory. I like doing interviews, talking to Carlos and whoever else on stream. And, I recognize that it's a great way to make revenue for the site and for myself, produce my own means of subsistence. But I just have a lot of stuff that I like to do. I'm writing a book right now. I coach wrestling. I'm still competing in wrestling. Starting a CPUSA chapter and organizing. So, I don't know. I see myself continuing to do a collection of things, but streaming is the best way to make revenue via politics for me and still do something that I feel like is helpful and educational. So that's where I'm at with it. Good question. Hey, yo, Eddie plus chat. Hey, yo, Unparalleled Dev. Eddie, will you react to the Polisturm live stream? Yeah, everyone wants us to do that. We will definitely do that eventually. I'll sit down with Carlos and we'll react to it. Have you had a chance to interview Vijay Prashad? I have not. I haven't talked to him in sorry, cracked my neck. I haven't talked to Vijay in a little bit. We usually message over WhatsApp, which I don't look at very much. So I'm just terrible at getting back to people in general, too. So everyone's busy. Alrighty. Let's start with the David Pakman video. Because.
Let's go next to Lucas from Massachusetts.
Not yet, David.
Let's go next to Lucas.
David! Because this video is ridiculous. This is not David Pakman's original Ukraine video, which is about 10 minutes, which we'll also talk about. This is just one he posted like a day ago. It's 1 minute and 30 seconds. Somebody is calling into his show. This is a show that I used to watch. This is the show that I used to recommend to people back in like 2016 or 2017 when I was like a freshman or sophomore in college. And David Pakman, I mean, he's always been a social democrat or a lib, but he really, really fell into the Trump derangement syndrome. Almost all of his content is just, about how horrible the Trump administration was compared to other administrations. And he's been pretty bad on the Ukraine-Russia issue, as you would imagine. So this is a funny call-in, I thought. Let me mute myself.
From Massachusetts. Lucas, welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, David.
Hi.
I'm ecstatic right now because I didn't get to ask my question last week, but here's my question.
Please.
So a lot of people are optimistic about the war in Ukraine because of Ukrainians' advances. I'm not, and here's why.
Okay.
I worry that if the GOP takes back Congress, they will block Ukraine funding and side with Putin. What do you think?
I think they almost certainly will. Now, just as a heads up, you've got Discord notifications blinging in the background, and that is a faux pas during the phone call.
Okay.
So if you can get those turned off, that would be really great. I think
he always seems so passive aggressive to me. Side note. You actually have Discord notifications? That's a serious disruption to my thinking. Could you turn those off? Maybe I'm nitpicking, but am I right? Tell me if I'm right in the chat.
I think you are absolutely correct. And when
No. Why?
If Republicans get the opportunity to stop the funding to Ukraine, they will do it under the guise of, we have to take care of America first. That's what they're saying. And of course, many people will look at it and say, this is another way that you're playing soft with Putin. And they'll say, it's not about playing soft with Putin. It's about, we need to deal with crime and immigration and all these different things. And of course, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. But yeah, they will try to at least cut funding to Ukraine. And that's the type of explanation that they'll give.
All right. Thank you for answering my question. I've heard a lot of different perspectives on it. I'm glad to hear yours.
Oops, had myself muted. So I saw some shows that I like, actually, covering this recent piece from the Washington Post, the Jeff Bezos-owned Washington Post, where they were fear-mongering, saying if Republicans win the next election, they might cut funding to Ukraine. They might send less weapons and arms to Ukraine. They were saying this was a bad thing, which people were saying, socialists and anti-imperialists were saying it's kind of crazy, that the Republican Party is now more anti-war than the Democrats. The Democrats are saying, don't let those Republicans in power. They might end war funding. They might cut war funding. They might not want to wage an endless proxy war against Russia, and they might look for a peace agreement. And the Democrats are mad at this. They're siding with the military-industrial complex. They're saying that these Democrats won't protect the profits of the military-industrial complex. And, this was the first content that I had seen from David Pakman about the conflict in Ukraine. And I was like, wow, he's really parroting that Washington Post narrative that this is bad. This is a bad thing that Republicans might take power, and stops funneling, it's well over $40 billion now that the U.S. has funneled to Ukraine in weapons funding. As inflation is skyrocketing, as people can't afford baby formula, our infrastructure is crumbling. There are a lot of places in the U.S. that don't have clean water, or even close to it. And we're prioritizing sending a bunch of weapons to wage a proxy war against Russia and Vladimir Putin. So then I thought, maybe there's a chance that David Pakman was, making the same point that some other shows that I actually like were making earlier, and saying, isn't it crazy that the Republicans are more anti-war than the Democrats at this point? But that's not what he was saying. I went back and looked at his earlier Ukraine coverage, and he's called skeptics of the U.S. narrative in Ukraine the alt-left, which he distinguishes from tankies, who are equally bad. But the alt-left includes people like Matt Taibbi and Tulsi Gabbard, who are apparently pro-Putin, for being skeptical about NATO's actions and U.S. interests in Ukraine and the interests of the military-industrial complex. But David has no such skepticisms. He's just worried that those big bad Republicans might not serve the military-industrial complex hard enough. And I guess this shouldn't be surprising, because David has also, for a so-called leftist or social democrat or whatever he calls himself, he's been a pretty big supporter of Israel, calling it a conflict rather than an occupation, or an apartheid as the UN calls it. Pretty much, refusing to denounce Israel at every turn. And now we have the military-industrial complex and Ukrainian President Zelensky saying that they want to turn Ukraine into a big Israel. Here's the roadmap. This is from the Atlantic Council, which is basically just a think tank or a mouthpiece for the military-industrial complex, made up of a bunch of weapons contractors and various corporate interests who heard Zelensky say that he wants Ukraine to be a big Israel. And they liked that plan so much, those weapons contractors, that they decided to build a map, a little blueprint. Here's how we can turn Ukraine into a big Israel. Because who doesn't want another apartheid state that can act as a U.S. military outpost? That's just what everybody needs. And take billions and billions and billions of dollars a year, working class Americans' tax dollars, funnel that into the pockets of weapons contractors, and then just militarize the crap out of Ukraine and Israel so they can enforce apartheid, and attack the U.S.'s enemies when it's convenient for the U.S. What a better use of our money and resources. It's insane. Yeah. And, with David Pakman, anybody who doesn't call themselves, or, who doesn't say that Putin is the principal aggressor, that's the wording he uses. The people who say that Putin, or who won't say Putin is the principal aggressor, are tankies or the alt-left, which is simply just not the case, especially when you use that wording, right? You could say that Putin's invasion was rash and wrongheaded and violent. You could say it's murderous and people have died and it wasn't the correct geopolitical move. You could make that argument. But ultimately, he's not the principal aggressor, because the U.S. is at his doorstep. The U.S. helped dismantle Yugoslavia, carpet bomb Yugoslavia, and put more NATO troops there than any other place on earth. And this is after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, when NATO was an organization that was supposedly created to protect the West from the Soviet Union. Now the Soviet Union collapses and they're dismantling countries and expanding towards Russia's borders. And then you have the 2014 coup in Ukraine that we talked about, which put a vehemently anti-Russian government in power, pro-U.S. government, and kicked off the civil war in the Donbass against mostly Russian-speaking people. And then by 2022, after people of the Donbass had requested Russia enter with their military and help them out 10 times, Russia did, right? So you can disagree with that. You can argue that that was wrong, but you can't say that Putin was the principal aggressor, because he wasn't. But according to David Pakman, the great social democrat supporting the People's Republic of Norway and Switzerland, thinks that it was all Putin's fault, that he's just a madman who decided to invade one day. So yeah. Social democracy. Basically just liberalism. We need to end the West. Let's just take the West and move it to the East. Have you guys seen that Sacha Baron Cohen bit where he's talking to Bernie? And he's like, what if we take the 99% and put it inside of the 1%? And Bernie's like, I don't think you understand what I'm saying. Like, then they wouldn't be the 99%. If they were in the 1%, that wouldn't work mathematically. And Sacha, that was one of the funniest shows ever. Sacha Baron Cohen's This Is America, I think it's called. He like went to the most conservative, like, rural location you possibly could imagine or find ever. And then he goes to like a town hall and shows them a picture of their city with like a giant mosque in the middle and says, this is our plan to build the world's largest mosque right here in your country, right here in your town. It's all these like angry country white people who are like, what the hell? They start freaking out. Oh, that show is too good. The best part though is they get all these Republicans to admit or to support a program training kindergartners how to use firearms in super young children. So Sacha Baron Cohen goes to talk to these politicians, and he says that we have this program in Israel where we've been, teaching kindergartners, first graders, and second graders how to use firearms. Would you promote this here in the U.S.? And they get all these Republicans like Joe Walsh to support it. And Joe Walsh says, like, in only a few weeks, you can turn your first grader into a first grenader. Like, dead serious, thinking this is going to be published and like this is a good idea. It's so funny. And then the way he gets them to film the commercial is by saying, we're going to give you a medal for being such a big supporter of Israel. So he butters them up by saying, you get a medal for supporting Israel, and then tricks them into just making a fool of themselves. It's so funny. So funny. All right, it's Richard Wolff time. It's time to get serious. All right, I've actually already seen this video. So while y'all watch Richard Wolff, I am going to run and grab my water or refill my water because I'm dying of thirst. But this is a 5-minute video, so I will be back before it's over.
This is Richard Wolff from Democracy at Work with another Wolff Responds. I'd like to speak with you today about U.S. capitalism, the condition of the U.S. economy right now. I think it's at a crucial point. I think big changes are coming. I think it deserves way more attention than it is getting, particularly from the perspective I would like to offer now. We are coming off 2.5 years almost now of one of the worst periods in the history of U.S. capitalism. We suffered at the same time a major public health disaster, COVID-19, and the second worst collapse of our economic system since the Great Depression of the 1930s. 2020 and 2021 were the combined experience of that. More than half of our labor force suffered unemployment for some period of that time. Losses of jobs, losses of self-esteem, losses of homes, losses of income, and losses of a sense of a future. All of those over 2 years plus, devastating. But then this capitalist system went one further step. It hit this country with an unconscionable inflation. As if the other 2 years weren't worse enough, capitalism is showing us what it is capable of. Prices are rising 8 to 10% a year on average. Wages are not keeping up, not even close. Therefore, the inequality, which got worse through the pandemic and the crash, is getting still worse through the inflation. And now the final step, which provoked this video. Major banks in this country are telling us that because of the devastating inflation and all the economic damage it is causing on top of everything else, the government is going to step in to try to stop or slow the inflation by raising interest rates. It's already begun. May and June are scheduled to be big further increases. And at least 3 banks, Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, and the Bank of America, have now predicted a recession at the end of this year or early next year as a consequence of rising interest rates. It's too much. These kinds of repeated blows to the working class of this country, the vast majority of people who don't own significant amounts of stock, who depend on their jobs for the incomes they and their families need. We are now saying to them, you really don't matter. And they're angry and they're bitter. And the social conflicts and divisions and angers and rages are getting worse by the hour.
So we heard recently that the Fed is going to be bracketing up, increasing the benchmark interest rates that are allowed. So this video from Richard Wolff was 5 months ago. You know, and 5 months ago, he was able to predict that the big banks were going to do this using Marxist economics. And it's really hard to predict when a recession or a so-called crash will happen, especially because the Fed can push them back using methods like this. But Wolff basically predicts what's going to happen. And when you compare Marxist economics to bourgeois economics, which, like I was saying earlier, I studied a bit in college, not as much as I wanted to, but a handful. Bourgeois economics is, it's revealed that it's just a pseudoscience, right? It's literally just the science of how do we keep capitalism going, and how do we maximize profit without, letting the system collapse in on itself. It's not an actual science analyzing economics and what the best way to organize economics would be. When you talk about this like Western Milton Friedmanite trickle-down economics or Austrian economics. So if we read this article from CNN, Fed goes big again with third straight 3/4 point rate hike. So they've been increasing the interest rates for a long time. And they say that this is an aggressive move to tackle white-hot inflation that's been plaguing the U.S. economy. So it's framed as just a way to stop inflation, right? We have to increase the interest rates because prices are increasing, which is true. Richard Wolff says that prices are increasing 8 to 10% a year, while wages are, of course, not increasing. But, even bourgeois economics admits that recessions are inevitable, that you get recessions every once in a while, that the system is just bound to fall into crises and completely crash and leave a bunch of people destitute. They call it the business cycle. And they say when there's a recession, though, eventually things go back up, and they get better, and you just have to wait it out, which is ridiculous because in a socialist system you could prevent recession. But that's just an example of how bourgeois economics will never, ever, ever criticize the system. Right? They don't see a system that crashes every once in a while and just leaves a huge mass of the population in a terrible situation, unemployed and unable to meet their basic needs. They're like, oh, I guess this is just the business cycle. It's got to be this way because the market always works. Got to trust the invisible hand. And then really their job as economists just becomes keeping the system going. And Marxist economics, like what Richard Wolff said, always gives us a better explanation than bourgeois economics, mainstream economics, and CNN, because it is allowed to criticize the system. It does see the contradictions of the system at its core. It sees the roots of these things like economic crises. It's rooted in overproduction. And the increase of interest rates isn't just to combat inflation, it's to keep the profits of the bankers and the industrial capitalists high. So in Lenin's imperialism, he talks about when capitalism enters its imperialist stage, you have the banks merge with the industrial capitalists. So say like US or Chase Bank merging with the oil companies. And that makes it easier to move around their money. And to move around their capital. And like any capitalist, these banks and industrial capitalists that we call finance capital have to continually increase their profits and their revenue. They have to expand and grow and grow and grow. Otherwise, they'll go under, and they're used to a certain amount of revenue, which at this point, is massive. So these crises of overproduction are these capitalist firms not being able to maintain their absurd revenues, right? Because they're not just paying for production. They're not just paying for the wages of the worker and then the tools, the means of production. They're paying giant, massive shareholder payouts, which have to keep growing and growing and growing. And if they don't, the system will crash. So that's why they're increasing interest rates so they can charge people more for their debt and keep the profits of bankers high and prevent the economy from going under. Because, of course, the profits of these shareholders can never be questioned. Those can never be reduced. We can't ever nationalize the banks, and take the profit out of it. So we don't have to continually raise prices and increase interest rates on people with debt to keep the bank's profits high enough. They never offer some kind of alternative system like Richard Wolff does as a Marxist. Yeah, and then eventually, you have a situation like what happened in 2008 where they keep raising interest rates higher and higher and higher. And now, today they're at their highest rate since 2008. And then eventually people just can't pay them back, right? People don't have enough money to pay it back. So the banks and the Fed push this crisis of overproduction back, using paper shuffling and financial magic. But eventually people aren't going to be able to pay it back. And that's just, the workers not being able to buy back the products that they create, the crisis of overproduction that Marx talks about in Capital. And then firms crash, people lose their jobs. That means people have less money to buy commodities. That means more firms crash, and you get a recession. And no matter what they tell you, profit has something to do with it, right? Because these firms go under when they can't maintain and continually expand profits. And if these companies were nationalized and worker owned, they wouldn't need to maintain billions of dollars a year in shareholder profits. Everybody else be damned. I remember the 2008 recession. Not a good time. I didn't understand money at the time. I just remember my parents being real stressed and talking about economics for the first time in my life. And I was like, this is boring. Money's stupid. What are you guys so worried about money and politics for? Back when everything was good. when we didn't have to worry about money. Everyone always says that, like, enjoy being a kid. It's the best time of your life. But they don't tell you it's because, you know, when you're an adult, you have to sell yourself into wage slavery in order to survive and put food on the table for your family. You don't understand that until you're 15 or 16. You get a minimum wage job and you work your butt off for an hour and you get $7.25 and you can barely buy a popsicle and you're like, and your boss is a gazillionaire and you're like, this is weird. And then the old people are like, just shut up and accept it. This is the only way. And you're like, I don't know about that. Other people who work at this golf course with me. That's why cops are getting a boost to their funding while rail workers and port workers are being talked to. Blair Mountain 2.0 for sure. One of my buddies is a rail worker and a union organizer. There's a lot of good stuff going on the rail with the rail workers. And I mean, they're treated like crap. They're treated worse than almost any other section of workers in the entire working class. So. Wolff says there are two types of economics curriculum taught in college in the West. Economics, capitalist fairy tales, and business, cold capitalist reality. That's true. There's a story that someone, I can't remember who tells this story. I think I heard it from Carlos. But he says he saw a business owner on his flight and he was reading Marx's Capital, and he asked him, like, you know, why are you reading Marx's Capital if you're a capitalist? He's like, so I can learn how to exploit people better. And I got a business minor in college because my parents thought it would be more practical, I guess, if politics didn't work out. But that's exactly what business and marketing is. You know, it's just like cold capitalist reality boiled down to a science. You know, how do we design society around making firms the most profit they can possibly make? You know, how do we exploit workers and suppress wages down as much as possible? How do we prevent unionization? And then how do we market our product and get people to spend more money than they need? Yeah, and we were talking about the banks earlier and how the banks are increasing their interest rates. I was writing a chapter for my Venezuela book about how about the way that the U.S. uses Colombia to launch regime change efforts into Venezuela. Sometimes just bribing people to come over to Colombia from Venezuela. Sometimes, you know, launching attacks through the border. Various different things, but you know, the U.S. is very, very, very involved in Colombia. They're basically militarily occupying it. The DEA is there fighting the drug war. And one of the humanitarian efforts that the U.S. State Department has on their website that you probably wouldn't read, you know, unless you were doing research for a book about Colombia and Venezuela, which I happen to be doing. Their humanitarian effort was to give like 100,000 in credit to Colombians. Credit, meaning they're going to set up all these U.S. banks, these banks connected to the IMF, the World Bank, or Chase Bank, U.S. Bank, whoever else, or whatever banking apparatuses the U.S. has in Latin America. And then they're going to give Colombian people a bunch of credit, meaning loans that they have to pay back with interest, meaning they're going to be debt trapped like most Americans. So they're just putting a bunch of Western banks in Colombia, debt trapping their people, charging them absurd interest, and then calling it humanitarian aid, calling it charity. And I forgot to read off these debt statistics earlier, but some of the statistics Richard Wolff listed about the worsening economy or a coming recession are interesting. Like the price is increasing 8 to 10% every year with wages not able to keep it up. But these are some of the American debt statistics because, you know, with the banks increasing interest rates, that's going to affect people who owe debt. They're going to have to pay more back to the bank each month, or however their payment schedule is set up. And I have healthcare debt written on here. Healthcare debt's technically supposed to not accumulate or have increased interest or interest above a certain rate or something. But either way, it's just crazy that so many people have healthcare debt. So I kept it on there. That's 41% of Americans have healthcare debt. But Americans who are going to have their interest hiked up by this recent interest rate jack is Americans with credit card debt, which is the vast majority of Americans. Almost all Americans have at least some kind of credit card debt. 30% have between $1,000 and $5,000. 15% have over $5,000. And 6% of Americans have over $10,000 in credit card debt. And like I said, now the U.S. is trying to outsource this to other countries. We had the article I wrote recently about Bill Gates's, dang it, I just spilled my dang water. Bill Gates's efforts to debt trap small and medium African farmers. And I was just telling you about the efforts to debt trap people in Colombia. Student debt, 13.5% of Americans. And then 77% of all U.S. households have debt total. So with this hike in the interest rates, what people got to pay back on their loans, 77% of Americans are going to be hurt, because 77% of Americans have been trapped in debt, which that alone should show you how predatory the economic system is at its core, and how this economic system is dying, needs to be changed. The fact that 71% of people in the richest country in the world are indebted to the people who actually have all the wealth that makes us the richest country in the world, quote unquote. But then the fact that, they're hiking up the interest rates, the fact that you have these people on Wall Street and London making absurd, unimaginable profits, billions and billions and billions of dollars for doing nothing. And, we're going to increase prices and increase interest rates on everybody who owes debt, all the working people who owe debt, so we can maximize revenue for those people on Wall Street and make sure they're all right. When if there is a hardcore recession like in 2008 and a bunch of firms start going under and the banks go under, they're just going to get bailed out by the government like they did last time. Last time Obama bailed out GM and some of the most important industrial plants, so the industrial capital, and then he bailed out the big banks. So that's the merger of industrial and banking capital that Lenin calls finance capital, which is the driver of imperialism. And that's who gets bailed out when we have these capitalist crises of overproduction, which are created by the capitalists and the banks, or really the capitalist system. Debt is one of the USA's biggest exports. Absolutely. I mean, debt has been a weapon ever since global capitalism became a thing. With capitalism spread across the globe, it becomes a global system and reaches its imperialist stage. And then shortly after World War II, you have the creation of the global financial system. So finance capital and imperialism becomes a global hegemonic system. And the U.S. then can use debt and use these banks as one of their most powerful weapons to wage hybrid wars on countries. Using structural adjustment loans. The banks help enforce sanctions because, like with the Swiss bank, when Cuba needed ventilators to help treat people for COVID, Swiss bank just stopped them from making their payment. So helping the U.S. enforce their sanctions. Similar thing happened with Venezuela and their medical supplies. Son's first job was for about $20 an hour as an assistant chef and busboy. While we have issues with being close to the imperial core, Norway does make it easier to organize people because we don't have to be chasing down the almighty kroner. And if we fall in hard times, we are taken care of. This is a double-edged sword as it reinforces the validity of social democracy on one hand, but gives room for the left to, go for the left. Really interesting comment. Thank you, Lars, Facebook viewer, for leaving that comment. We've been getting some more Facebook viewers lately. I think the International magazine shouted us out, so that helped. But thank you for being with us, Facebook watchers. Be sure to like the stream or comment. But yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, as someone living in the US, I wish we had Norway's social safety net, right? I wish, just for like my own life and the life of my close friends and roommates, I wish we had those benefits in my family. But yeah, I totally see what you mean in that it reinforces the validity of social democracy. I wonder if that those social safety nets make the crises of overproduction, the regular economic crises, a lot better for people. I imagine they would, but those would still impact people, and you still have all the various effects of capitalism that still impact people. And unfortunately, I'm sure the reactionaries and the capitalists will always be struggling to take the gains of the working class away, take the social safety net away. But yeah, I totally see how it could be a double-edged sword. How that would be hard to explain to people and be like, this really isn't it. And they're like, well, whatever, we got it better than the Americans. Because that can even be hard in America, where people just want, Scandinavian social democracy because they think Cuba is like a hellhole. So yeah, but I also see how, it could, like, American workers just don't have a lot of time to think about politics, or to study politics. And having a more organized working class would give us, a better idea of what class struggle is, because also a lot of American workers don't even think of themselves as a class. And it would also give us more resources and more time to wage that struggle. Interesting comment. Thank you very much. Ukraine might amount to a global war. I, for one, will gladly sacrifice my life to fight America. One Tony Stark bomb falls in Moscow. I'm going out. Cobra Commander will be leading the Vanguard. We are raising interest rates now in Norway. Uh-oh, here comes the recession. Then financial magicians make bets speculating on the debt. Yeah, good point. Good point. And that is like the kind of technique you learn in bourgeois economics or like business classes. The cold calculating capitalist reality. That would be the kind of thing you could learn. Like, here's how you make somebody a portfolio or speculate during a crisis, during a crash, in a way that allows them to make a bunch of money, or even make a bunch of money off the crash itself. Yeah, I don't know what's gonna happen. Someone said first thought that was Ivan Drago in the bag. I do have I'll just show you poster of Rocky. And it's from Rocky 4. You can't see it, but there's a little hammer and sickle on that glove to represent Ivan Drago, the good guy of the movie. Yeah, but besides fighting, we would also need to make sure we get a socialist society afterwards, not some petite bourgeois nationalist one like now. Otherwise, it's not worth it. Definitely. Working class power. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Sorry, this is what I was saying before I talked about Rocky. Or started talking about Rocky. It'll be interesting to see if, we hit a recession, or if the crisis deepens or gets worse, which I imagine it will, right? I imagine eventually we'll get to that point where people can't pay back these loans to the banks, which causes a bunch of them to crash. Yeah, I don't like the U.S. has almost no real economy now. We've outsourced so many of our jobs. We've deindustrialized so much of our country. We're really not producing that much. And there's so many countries who are now forming, in an anti-imperialist alliance against the U.S. We're not going to be as able to exploit people. And I think that's going to make these recessions worse on the masses. I think the recessions, if deindustrialization and neoliberalism continues, and the anti-imperialist struggle around the world continues to gain ground, I think the U.S. is going to be looking at quite the crisis, economically and politically. And, we could either have a right-wing revolution, or we could have a socialist revolution. As this person was saying, the revolution that would come about, doesn't necessarily have to have a socialist class character, right? You could have the petty bourgeoisie have a revolution and overthrow the current ruling imperialist bourgeois class. Like, you could have MAGA people overthrow them. And that would not necessarily be good, and it wouldn't be socialism. Which is why we need socialism and, need to convert working class MAGA people and working class Democrats to the right side, to the side of the working class, the side of socialism. JB, what up? Yo, hey, comrade. Good to catch you live. Thank you for tuning in, JB. Really appreciate that. Hope you're having a good day. I already went through all the videos that I wanted to go through, but socialism uses capitalism as a red herring for corruption. Not sure I totally understand what you mean. How far can you push and enslave everyday people? The U.S. is pretty far. And is there a pushback trigger? Well, there definitely is. I mean, that's what the riots have been. And there have been a lot of riots and tons of political unrest. Like you had petty bourgeois Trump supporters, reactionary or right-wing people storm the Capitol just last year. You're already having insurrections. It's just not focused. It's not focused at all. It's just basically blind rage or a lot of reactionary rage towards people in power. Which is why we need theory and organization. Theory and organization, probably the two words that Vladimir Lenin said most. And look at Russia. They overthrew their imperialist ruling class and created the first workers' state. Rocky IV was the worst out of all the Rocky movies due to its anti-communist propaganda and due to the scene where they show Ivan Drago taking performance-enhancing steroids when training to fight. Rocky, near the end of the movie, I interpret that as them implying that the Soviets didn't win, honestly. There have been a lot of athletes from the East. There have been a lot of athletes from everywhere that have been caught doping. But there have been a lot from Russia in combat sports, which also the international bodies that do those drug testing, though, they were floating the idea of banning Russia from the upcoming Olympics and stuff. They're very biased towards the West. So, yeah, you never know. But, yeah, and Rocky IV used to be my favorite Rocky movie because it was, the most entertaining and the most kind of goofy for, I was a kid. I liked it the most. I didn't really understand the first Rockies as much. They're more dramatic and they're more well-made, more adult movies. Rocky IV is goofy as crap, but I liked it. And then I grew up. I'm like, oh, man, this is the most anti-communist movie ever. The Russians start cheering for Rocky when he's fighting the Russian fighter, and he's like, everybody can change. There's this really funny 30 for 30. Hold on, I'm just gonna pull it up and show you all. You know what 30 for 30 is? It's like a dramatic sports show, and there's a parody version of it. Some college humor.
До сих пор иногда, когда я закрываю глаза, я до сих пор вижу эту схватку. До сих пор прокатывается эхом по моей стране. Если я могу измениться, и ты можешь измениться, когда любой может измениться. Когда я увидел, как Политбюро встает поприветствовать американца на этой нашей земле, я понял, что Советский Союз развалится.
When Rocky made Stalin himself stand up out of his chair and cheer for the American imperialists, He put all that imperialism and the sanctions aside. The U.S. killing 20% of Korea's population in the Korean War, and all the people they massacred across Latin America and the global South during the Cold War to fight the Soviet Union. The Politburo put all those things aside, and they cheered for America because Rocky was really tough. Anybody can change, even Stalin himself in Rocky IV.
So it's 1985, which is 3 years after Balboa Lang 2, which at the time was the most watched fight in U.S. boxing history.
From a political standpoint, it was as tense as ever.
In the sports world, U.S. and the Soviets, they really hated each other.
Memories are still fresh of the Olympic upset in 1980, and surely the Soviets wanted revenge.
In comes Ivan Drago.
Drago is the kind of embodiment of the Soviet Union, half machine, and you wonder if he has a soul in there somewhere. And Apollo Creed is the embodiment of America.
Now, I've followed boxing and dance for 23 years. Apollo Creed was in dance shape, not boxing shape.
And for those who don't know, this is the actual plot of Rocky IV. It's actually like the biggest Cold War propaganda movie you could imagine.
He is clearly exhausted by the dance number he did with James Brown 5 minutes earlier. And before the second round is over, that's it.
This was very difficult for the American public to see.
I've only cried twice because of a sporting event. When Happy Gilmore accidentally killed Chubbs, and then when Apollo died.
Has the fight date been set yet?
December 25th. It's in Russia. I interviewed Rocky about that time. In '84, he was retired. He just wanted to spend time at home with his family and his robot, like a normal guy.
Balboa versus Drago was the second biggest TV event of the decade.
So in the first and second movies, which are pretty good, Rocky fights Apollo Creed. And then at the beginning of Rocky IV, Apollo Creed fights this Soviet fighter named Ivan Drago, who takes steroids and is basically a machine. And he kills Apollo Creed. Apollo Creed is wearing his like American shorts, and he dies in the ring because Drago is so good. I mean, that happens in boxing. People do die in the ring, but it was like supposed to be an exhibition fight where they didn't hit each other that hard, and he got killed.
Second only to the MASH finale.
MASH finale. Awesome.
This was not just the focal point of the fight world on that night. This was the focal point of the world.
Rocky learned from Creed and decided not to do a 20-minute dance number.
Boy, the first round, Rocky was just outmatched. I mean, this was a bloodbath.
These guys landed 91% of their power punches. That's unheard of.
The fight became heated, and before long, it devolved into something that barely resembled boxing.
I've been covering boxing a long time. I've never seen anything like this. I mean, these guys would punch each other way after the bell sounded. They wrestled each other. They threw each other across the ring.
The cornermen were fighting each other. Drago picked up his promoter by the neck.
From a technical standpoint, it's the worst defense I've ever seen in a boxing ring.
Just to give you an idea how hard these guys were punching. Sometimes the punch didn't even land, but the head flew back anyway, like from the air or something.
And then something changed in the crowd.
I have covered sports for 35 years, and I have never seen a home crowd switch sides.
Rocky.
The crowd switched sides and started rooting for Rocky because of his spirit or passion, commitment. I don't know. It never really made sense to me.
They started rooting for Rocky because of the Rocky spirit, or I don't have a good answer for that.
Rocky lands an amazing combination of punches.
And just like that, history was made.
In here, there were two guys killing each other. That's better than 20 million.
And who could have predicted that this relatively inarticulate rambling at the end of a boxing match would go down as one of the most important speeches of the 20th century?
Everybody should say.
I think it always bothered Rocky that he never received much credit for his role in ending the Cold War. Reagan never once thanked him, and I think that's part of the reason that he faded from the spotlight.
Oh, it's so dumb. That's funny though. Crediting Rocky with ending the Soviet Union. Like that's actually the plot of the movie though. Rocky brings Russia, the Soviet Union, and the U.S. together through boxing, and he gets the leadership of the Soviet Union and all the people to cheer for him against their own fighter. Like I said, forgetting about the fact that all the Western countries invaded the Soviet Union after the Workers' Revolution, forgetting all the sanctions the U.S. kept on the Soviet Union, all the violence and regime change efforts and economic warfare the U.S. perpetrated during the Cold War. All the people of the East forgot about that because of Rocky, because of his spirit. And after that fight, Rocky actually punched through the Berlin Wall, and communism was defeated. So, shout out to Sylvester Stallone. I pity the fool who projects the failures of capitalism onto communism. That's what Mr. T would say, also known as Clubber Lang, the villain of Rocky 3. I'm kind of a Rocky nerd. I'm a big fan. Rocky changed the Soviet Union. 27 people die, or 27 million people die after years of neoliberal shock therapy. Yes, that happened as a direct result of Rocky. Rocky was also the designer of perestroika. He sold off all the Soviet Union, all the Soviets industry to corporations and Western banks for pennies. And he caused massive unemployment, drugs, and sex trafficking to flow back over the border once again, all because of Rocky. I watched the History Channel, and all the programming was basically advertisement for fast food restaurants. I haven't watched the History Channel in a while, but that doesn't surprise me. Because I remember there was a point, like my mom used to let me watch the History Channel more than other TV. I think I was only allowed to watch, like so much cartoons. You can only watch an hour or whatever. And then you can keep watching TV, but it's got to be Discovery Channel or the History Channel. And then at a certain point, it was just like Pawn Stars and like these reality TV shows all the time. And the History Channel would call it History Made Every Day. It's like, okay, yeah, by that standard, you could say anything is history. Anything belongs on the History Channel because we're all making history every day, technically, because it's all in the past after we do it. But like Pawn Stars is not history. Not really. I mean, sometimes they talk about historical artifacts and you have American pickers, I guess. But I think of it, more as like historical documentaries and stuff. But it's all about the views and the revenue. That's why China has more educational entertainment media than us. I heard a lot of people call Star Trek deeply communist in its substance. Yeah, we actually, I mean, I'm not a big Star Trek guy, but we did a video once reacting to this communist Star Trek clip. Oh yeah, actually, if you search Star Trek communist, Midwestern Marx is one of the first channels that comes up. But yeah, basically the idea is that they don't have class. They've evolved beyond class society. So now they use their resources for scientific advancement and human development, which is why they have all this technology and they're in space. Thanks, Rocky, Gorbachev, and Yeltsin. They brought AIDS to Russia. And can't believe Rocky did that. Well, y'all, make sure that you tune in to our stream in 3 hours with Ramiro Sebastian Funes. It's going to be me, Carlos, and Ramiro. We're going to be talking about Edward Bernays and imperialist brainwashing. We talked about Edward Bernays a little bit last time, and I uploaded some of those videos to our channel. We were just talking about the ways that the intelligence agencies and the State Department are able to get so many people to support these murderous U.S. interventions. And sort of comparing it to like mind control or brainwashing. So here's our last video, and we want to talk about Edward Bernays now, who is one of the inventors of propaganda and of manufacturing consent and lying to people, manipulating the media to justify war and murderous intervention. So we'll be talking about him with Ramiro on this channel at 7 live. Also be uploading it afterwards, of course, but you'll be able to ask us questions, send us super chats, all that good stuff live. Yeah. Oh yeah, and then one more thing I want to bring up. We are doing I'll just send the link here real quick. The Indians have a very /chapter that I'm starting in my area is doing a warm clothes drive. We're partnering with a local organization to do a little bit of mutual aid. So I was collecting money via Venmo.
Attention, comrades, I need your help with something.
Sorry. Collecting money via PayPal or Venmo. And then I'm going to go to a thrift store and buy a bunch of nice warm clothes with the money people send, turn it into a video so people can see what they're buying and they know where their money's going. So there's the TikTok. I'll just play it real quick.
The CPUSA club I recently started with some close comrades is organizing for our first mutual aid event. We're going to be partnering with a local organization to do a warm clothes drive and collect clothing like this, which will then be donated to a local organization we're partnering with who are going to do an open closet. Make sure these warm clothes get to people in the community who need them most. And obviously it would be really difficult to donate clothing over TikTok. So instead, if y'all send money to the Midwestern Marks PayPal here or to my Venmo account here, I will use 100% of the money donated to go to a thrift store and buy some warm clothes for the open closet. And if we get a handful of donations, I'll definitely turn it into a video. I mean, I'll probably do that regardless. So yeah, help us out and thank you in advance.
So yeah, there we go. That's what we're doing. Hopefully going to get some educational content. Oh, thank you, JB. Everyone make sure to leave a like. Yes, thank you. Hopefully as part of this warm clothes drive, we'll do some educating, pass out literature. But right now our club is mostly focused on recruiting. So if you know anyone in Iowa who wants to organize, tell them to, or anyone in the Midwest in general, tell them to join CPUSA. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your support. Thank you for helping out. Thank you for supporting us on Patreon. JB says if you post it on Twitter, I'll retweet it. Definitely. I think I did post the video on Twitter, but I'll make another post about it, or you can retweet that video. Whatever. But thank you very much for the support. Thanks for the stream. Solidarity. Thank you. Yes, solidarity, everyone. Organize your workplace, organize your community, and we'll have socialism in no time. Much love.